Okay, this is the Algebra 2 video lesson for the second half of lesson 4.6, completing the square. In this lesson, we're actually going to solve equations by completing the square and then using that method to put functions into vertex form, put quadratic functions into vertex form. So what we did in the first half of the lesson was we solved with square roots, and then we saw that when you have a perfect square trinomial, you can also use the square root method, even if we have a b. So, and how that works is, and here's a little visual here, if this length is x and this length is x, this is an x squared. If this length is b and this length is x, this is b times x, like an area. And so if you take this b, x, and split it into two, or split it in half, right, then you can put them, this one will line up here like this. And then in order to make it a perfect square trinomial, you would just add this little b divided by 2 squared piece to complete the square. And now it's a square. And this side is x plus b over 2, and this side is x plus b over 2, which can be written as x plus b over 2 squared. So there's the visual on that. That's why it's called completing the square. You're actually taking this piece and completing the square. But what that means in algebra, right, if you have a trinomial, x squared plus bx, if you take your b, divide it in 2, and then square it, and you add it to your x squared plus bx, you can then factor it as this x plus b squared, b over 2 squared. And that way, when you have that in the equation, you can take the square root and solve. So that's how we're going to solve equations. But first, let's just take a problem where we're finding the value that completes the square. So this is how I like to teach it, where when we're doing, with quadratics, we have our a, remember our quadratic equation? We have our a is 1. You only complete the square when a is 1. I don't care what this book has. They have stuff in here where it's like, oh, 2x squared or something. No, we're going to learn something later that's going to help us solve. So you never complete the square if a is not 1. So I like you to write that so you know, okay, a is 1. So I can continue completing the square. And then b is negative 10. And then our c is going to be our b divided by 2 squared. So I will put this formula on your test. You'll just have to know what it is. So for completing the square, you need to take your b divided by 2 and then square it to get your c, your special c that completes the square. So in this case, we have a negative 10. So plug that in over 2. I'm also only ever going to give you even b's. If your b is not even, when we start solving equations, if your b is not even, we're not going to be completing the square either. So very specifically, if a is 1 and b is even, then you would complete the square. So that's why we're only going to be doing ones like this in class. So take your negative 10 and divide it by 2, and it becomes a negative 5 squared. And so even though anything squared is always positive, make sure you take this step, because this is going to help us when we factor it. But in this problem, we are just finding the number. Negative 5 squared is a positive 25. So that is the value that completes the square. And that's all this question is asking. So press pause and try this one. What value is going to complete the square for this? And hopefully you got 9. So you just take your b, make sure a is 1. Your b is 6 divided by 2, it's 3. 3 squared is 9. Okay, so that is the first step in solving equations by completing the square. And this is from the book that tells you what to do. It says rewrite this, when you have an equation, rewrite it so that one of the sides is just x squared plus bx, right? Get rid of that c, move it to the other side. And then we'll do just what we did in the last problem, find the value that completes the square. And then once you have that value, you're going to add it to both sides, right? Because it's an equation to keep them both equal. Then you're going to factor it when we have a nice neat factor, and then you can take the square root and solve for x. So why don't you watch this in practice. So in this case, what we want to do is, remember, we want to get this by itself. So we're going to get rid of this plus 2 by subtracting 2 on both sides. So you're going to have x squared minus 4x, and we're going to have our plus c here equals negative 2. And we're also going to add the c here. Let's just write it here. Plus c plus c. Okay, and now our a is 1. Let's write this another color. Our a is 1. Okay, our b is negative 4, and our c is going to be b over 2 squared, which in this case is negative 4 over 2 squared, which in this case is negative 2 squared equals 4. So this means we're going to add 4 to both sides here. So we're going to rewrite this as x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals, and then negative 2 plus 4 is positive 2. Okay, and so since we know how to factor, you can factor this, but also if you went through all this, the number before you square it is going to be what's going to happen, what's going to factor. So this is going to just become x minus 2 squared. So you actually don't need to do, you can, let's put our 4 on top, our negative 4. What two numbers multiply to positive 4, add to negative 4, negative 2, and negative 2. And if you did this right, obviously these two numbers are going to be the same. And they're going to be this number here. So you can just go straight and do it like that. And this is still my 2. So then we can we can then find the square root, take the square root. This becomes x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. And then we're just going to add 2 to both sides to get x alone, right? We need to solve for x. So this becomes x equals, and then since this is plus or minus, right, we're going to have 2 answers. Put this one first, 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. And that is your answer. If the question says round to the nearest tenth or something, put in your calculator 2. You're going to split this in 2, right? 2 plus root 2 and 2 minus root 2. So 2 plus the square root of 2 is about 3.4, and then 2 minus square root of 2 is about 0.6. So those would be your 2 answers, or these would be your 2 answers. Okay? So now we have one for you to try. So I'll leave this up. And you can see that. So remember, actually, let's leave the steps there too. So then follow these steps with this. Okay? Press pause. Check back for the solution. Okay, so hopefully you saw that you needed to add 9 to both sides after you added 11 to both sides. Then you, after you took your 6 divided by 2 and squared it, then you had this 3 squared, so you knew that this had to be a plus 3. Make sure you keep that sign there. And then take the square root of both sides to get rid of the squared. And don't forget your plus or minus, root 20. And then subtract 3 from both sides. So this becomes negative 3 plus or minus root 20. Or if you do your plus and your minus, split them in 2 and find to the nearest tenth, it's about 1.5 and about negative 7.5. Okay, and it just gets easier with practice. Okay, and then the last thing this is good for is to take a quadratic in standard form and move it to vertex form. So watch what happens here. We're going to be doing the same exact thing. We're going to be moving this, and the only thing difference is this is not a number, this is a y. But let's do exactly what we just did, but instead of this number, it's a y. So let's move our c to the other side. So let's add 6 to both sides. So this side becomes y plus 6. So you still have the y there, you're still just adding 6. Squared plus 4x. Okay, and here's where we're going to add our c plus c, and this is a plus c. Okay, and then let's figure out what our c is. A is 1, b is 4, c is b divided by 2 squared, where b is 4, so 4 divided by 2 squared is 2 squared is 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. This is a 4. So this becomes y plus 10 equals x squared plus 4x plus 4. And now we can beautifully factor this into, we're going to use our 2, x plus 2 squared. And this is just y plus 10. And then we can, vertex form is when we get y by itself. Now we can subtract this 10 on this side, and our vertex form is y equals the quantity x plus 2 squared minus 10. And now it says name the vertex and the y-intercept. So this number, so careful here, now that this is in vertex form, remember our vertex form is x minus h squared plus k, where our vertex is hk, so this h is the number being subtracted, right, x minus negative 2, so our h is negative 2, and then our k is negative 10. So our vertex is negative 2, negative 10. And then our y-intercept, remember, is this original c. So this form gives you the y-intercept. Y-intercept is 0c, original c. In this case, it's 0, negative 6. And then the vertex is negative 2 and negative 10. So this form gives you an easy y-intercept. This form gives you an easy vertex. Okay, now try this one on your own. I actually realized I wrote the same thing here. I didn't change this. So on your notes, it should say this. Okay, so try this one on your own and then check back for the solution. Okay, so here we subtract 5 from both sides and then take our b and divide it by 2, which is -3. That squared is 9. So we're going to add 9 to both sides. This becomes a 4. This can factor to x minus 3, right? Minus -3 squared. And then when you just have to subtract 4 to get it in vertex form. So you can see the vertex is the 3, positive 3, that's number being subtracted, and -4. And then the y-intercept is just 0, comma, this 5 here. And that's it. Time for practice. Enjoy.